The heavy doors of the Pentagon's most secure briefing room closed with a soft click that seemed to echo through the silence. General Marcus Kane sat straight in his chair, his weathered hands folded on the polished table as he studied the alien figure across from him. Ambassador Zeltak was tall, nearly 8 feet when standing, with dark green scales that caught the fluorescent lights. His yellow eyes moved constantly, taking in every detail of the room and the humans within it. The year was 2157, and Earth had been part of the Galactic Federation for 30 years now. Those 3 decades had brought amazing advances in technology and medicine, but they had also brought increasing pressure from the other member species. Humanity remained the newest addition to the Federation, and many of the older races viewed them with suspicion and barely concealed contempt. "General Kane," Zeltak began, his voice carrying a hissing quality that made some humans uncomfortable. "The Federation Council has reached a decision regarding Earth's military status. We can no longer permit your species to maintain independent armed forces." Kane felt his jaw tighten, but his expression remained neutral. He had been expecting something like this for months. The other Federation species had grown increasingly vocal about their concerns over human military capabilities. They called humans too aggressive, too unpredictable, too willing to resort to violence when diplomacy might suffice. "The terms are quite simple," Zeltak continued, sliding a data pad across the table. "Earth will place all military assets under Federation command. Your space fleet will be integrated into our peacekeeping forces. Your ground armies will be disbanded, with personnel offered positions in Federation support roles. Your special forces units will be completely dissolved." Admiral Lisa Carter, who sat to Kane's right, leaned forward slightly. She was one of the few humans who had managed to earn some respect among the alien races, partly due to her diplomatic skills and partly because she had never served in combat operations. "Ambassador, surely there must be room for negotiation. Earth's contribution to Federation security has been significant." Zeltak's head tilted in what might have been amusement among his species. "Admiral Carter, your contribution has been noted. However, the Council believes that human military independence poses an unnecessary risk to galactic stability. Your species has a documented history of warfare that spans thousands of years. No other Federation member has such an extensive record of organized violence." Defense Secretary Paul Martinez shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He was a political appointee who had spent more time in boardrooms than briefing rooms, and the alien's direct manner clearly unsettled him. "What happens if we refuse these terms?" "Economic sanctions," Zeltak replied without hesitation. "Earth's trade privileges will be revoked. Your access to Federation shipping lanes will be terminated. Medical technology transfers will cease. Within 18 months, your economy will collapse." Kane studied the terms displayed on the datapad. The language was formal and diplomatic, but the meaning was clear enough. Earth would become a protectorate, protected, but powerless. Human beings would serve the Federation in technical and support roles, but they would never again command their own destiny among the stars. The general looked around the room at the other officials present. Besides Carter and Martinez, there were several junior officers and a small group of military observers who had been brought in as part of a routine orientation program. One of them was Jake Morrison, a young Navy SEAL recruit who had shown exceptional promise during his initial training. The kid sat quietly in the back corner, taking in everything with sharp, intelligent eyes. "How long do we have to consider these terms?" Kane asked. "The Council requires an answer today," Zeltak replied. "This meeting was arranged to obtain your formal acceptance, not to begin negotiations. The decision has already been made." Kane felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had fought in 3 different conflicts during Earth's integration into galactic society. He had seen human soldiers adapt to alien weapons and tactics faster than anyone thought possible. He had watched young men and women from Earth earn grudging respect from alien commanders through their courage and skill, and now it was all going to end with his signature on a document. "General," Admiral Carter said quietly, "we have to consider the economic reality. Earth cannot survive outside the Federation. Our population depends on food imports from the agricultural worlds. Our industries rely on raw materials from the mining colonies. If we refuse these terms, millions will die. Martinez finished. We cannot be responsible for that kind of suffering. Kane nodded slowly. The math was simple and brutal. Earth had become dependent on the Federation for survival. The planet's population had grown beyond what the world could support independently, sustained by the abundance that membership in the galactic community provided. To lose that support would mean catastrophe on a scale that human history had never seen. There is one more thing, Zelthak added, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction. The Council has decided that Earth's integration into Federation security structures will serve as a model for future member species. Your compliance will demonstrate that even the most militaristic races can be successfully civilized. The insult was clear enough, though delivered with diplomatic politeness. Humanity was to become an example of what happened to species that resisted Federation authority. Future races would see Earth's fate and know that independence was not an option. Kane picked up his pen and looked at the document one more time. The terms were everything he had feared and worse. Not only would Earth lose its military independence, but humanity would be held up as an object lesson in the futility of resistance. Future generations would remember this day as the moment when the human spirit was finally broken. The room was completely silent except for the soft hum of air circulation systems. Kane could feel the weight of history pressing down on him as he prepared to sign away everything that countless men and women had died to protect. The pen felt impossibly heavy in his hand as he moved it toward the signature line. Outside, he knew that human ships still patrolled the outer system. In bases around the world, Special Forces units continued their training. On the frontier colonies, human Marines stood guard against pirates and raiders. All of that would end today, with a few strokes of his pen. Humanity would trade its freedom for safety, its independence for survival. Kane's pen hovered over the signature line as he made his final decision. General Kane's pen remained frozen above the document as the full weight of what he was about to do settled on his shoulders. Around the table, the other officials waited in tense silence. Ambassador Zelthak watched with those unblinking yellow eyes, clearly expecting the human to complete the formality of surrender without further delay. Kane forced himself to read through the terms one more time, though he had already memorized every brutal detail. Earth's entire space fleet would be transferred to Federation control within 60 days. The vessels would be stripped of their human crews and reassigned to alien commanders. Most of the ships would be converted to cargo haulers or mining platforms. Deemed unsuitable for military use by Federation standards, the ground forces would fare even worse. Every Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine unit on Earth would be disbanded. Personnel could apply for positions in Federation support services, but only after extensive psychological evaluation and retraining. The document made it clear that humans would serve in maintenance, logistics, and administrative roles. Combat positions would be reserved for more stable species. Most painful of all was the fate of the Special Forces units. Navy SEALs, Army, Rangers, Delta Force, Marine Force Recon, and similar elite formations from allied nations would be completely dissolved. The Federation considered these units particularly dangerous, viewing their unconventional training and tactics as evidence of humanity's inherent instability. The Federation Council understands that this transition will be difficult, Zelthak said, breaking the silence. However, we believe that removing the burden of military responsibility will allow humanity to focus on more suitable pursuits. Your species shows considerable aptitude for technical innovation and cultural achievement. Admiral Carter nodded, reluctantly. The ambassador has a point, General. Earth's scientists have made significant contributions to Federation research projects. Our artists and musicians have found appreciative audiences throughout the galaxy. Perhaps it's time to accept that our future lies in peaceful endeavors. Defense Secretary Martinez looked uncomfortable but voiced his agreement. The economic consequences of refusal would be catastrophic. We cannot ask the people of Earth to suffer for the sake of military pride. Our first responsibility is to ensure their survival and prosperity. Kane understood their reasoning, but something deep inside him rebelled against it. He had spent his entire adult life in service to his country and his species. He had watched human soldiers perform miracles of courage and ingenuity in the face of impossible odds. The thought of simply giving up everything they had built felt like a betrayal of everyone who had ever worn a uniform. But the numbers did not lie. Earth's population had grown to over 12 billion people, sustained by food imports from agricultural worlds scattered across 3 star systems. The planet's industries relied on raw materials from Federation mining colonies, materials that Earth could never obtain independently. Medical technology from alien worlds had eliminated most diseases and extended human lifespans far beyond historical norms. To lose Federation membership would mean watching billions of people starve while curable diseases returned to ravage the population. No military victory could justify that kind of suffering. No principle was worth the lives of innocent civilians who had done nothing but trust their leaders to make wise decisions. Kane glanced around the room at the faces of his colleagues and subordinates. Most showed resignation, mixed with barely concealed anger. They understood the necessity of what was happening, but that did not make it any easier to accept. These were people who had dedicated their lives to defending human independence, and now they were being asked to surrender that independence forever. His eyes fell on Jake Morrison, the young SEAL recruit sitting quietly in the corner. The kid was probably 22 or 23 years old, with the lean build and alert posture that marked him as Special Forces material. He had been brought to this meeting as part of an orientation program designed to expose promising candidates to high-level decision-making. Instead, he was witnessing the end of everything he had trained to defend. Morrison's expression was unreadable, but Kane could see the intensity in his eyes. The young man was processing everything he heard, analyzing it with the kind of tactical thinking that the SEALs tried to instill in their recruits. Kane wondered what the kid was thinking as he watched his future disappear with the stroke of a pen. "General," Martinez said softly, "the longer we delay, the more suspicious the Federation Council will become. They made it clear that this meeting was intended to formalize a decision that has already been made. If we appear to be stalling..." Kane nodded grimly. Zelthak had been diplomatic about it, but the threat was obvious enough. The Federation had the power to implement these changes with or without Earth's cooperation. At least by signing willingly, humanity might preserve some small measure of dignity in defeat. The pen felt heavier now, as if it were made of lead instead of metal. Kane took a deep breath and positioned it over the signature line. One simple signature would end 30,000 years of human military tradition. It would close the book on every battle ever fought for freedom and independence. It would ensure that future generations of humans would know safety and prosperity, but they would never know what it meant to stand up and fight for what they believed in. "I'm sorry," Kane said quietly, speaking to the room in general, but looking at Morrison specifically. "I'm sorry for what we're about to lose." He began to lower the pen toward the paper, his hand moving slowly as if fighting against invisible resistance. The signature line seemed to grow larger as he approached it, becoming a symbol of everything humanity was giving up: freedom, independence, the right to determine their own destiny among the stars. Zelthak leaned forward slightly, anticipation clear in his alien features. This was the moment he had been working toward for months, the final proof that even the most stubborn species could be brought to heel. The Federation's authority would be absolute, and other races would learn from humanity's example. The pen touched the paper, and Kane began to form the first letter of his name. The pen had barely begun to form the first curve of Kane's signature when a clear, strong voice cut through the heavy silence of the room. "Sir, permission to speak?" Every head in the room turned toward the back corner where Jake Morrison sat. The young SEAL recruit had risen to his feet and stood at perfect attention, his hands at his sides and his eyes fixed on General Kane. His voice had been respectful but firm, carrying the kind of confidence that came from intensive military training. Kane's pen stopped moving entirely. He looked up from the document to study the young man who had just interrupted the most important meeting in human history. Morrison's face was calm and determined, showing no sign of nervousness despite the attention he had drawn from some of the most powerful people on Earth. Admiral Carter's reaction was immediate and sharp. "You are completely out of line, recruit. This is not your place or your time to speak. Sit down immediately." But General Kane held up his hand, stopping Carter's rebuke before it could continue. Something in Morrison's eyes reminded him of his own younger days, when he had been willing to challenge authority if he believed it was the right thing to do. The kid had earned his place in this room through exceptional performance during training, and Kane was curious to hear what he had to say. "This better be important, son," Kane said, his voice carrying both warning and genuine interest. "We are about to make the most difficult decision in Earth's history. If you have something to contribute, it needs to be significant." Morrison nodded once, acknowledging both the opportunity and the responsibility that came with it. "Sir, with respect, I believe there is something the Federation representatives have not considered about human military capabilities, something that might change their perspective entirely." Ambassador Zelthak's scaled features shifted into what might have been amusement among his species. His yellow eyes fixed on Morrison with the kind of attention a predator might give to particularly entertaining prey. "A mere recruit believes he can educate the Galactic Federation? This is precisely why your species requires proper supervision." The alien's tone was dismissive and condescending. But Morrison did not react to the insult. He maintained his military bearing and continued to address General Kane directly. "Sir, I request permission to explain what I believe makes human military forces unique in the galaxy." Kane set his pen down completely and leaned back in his chair. The document remained unsigned on the table before him, but for the first time since the meeting began, he was not thinking about the signature line. "Go ahead, Morrison. You have 5 minutes." Defense Secretary Martinez looked uncomfortable with the entire situation. "General, surely we cannot allow a junior enlisted man to interfere with diplomatic negotiations. Ambassador Zelthak represents the most powerful alliance in known space, and Morrison represents the future of human military service," Kane replied. "If we are about to end that future, I think we owe it to ourselves to hear what he has to say." Morrison took a step forward, moving closer to the table but maintaining a respectful distance. "Sir, every species in the Federation evolved under specific environmental conditions that shaped their military thinking. The Vorthak were apex predators on their homeworld. They understand individual combat and dominance hierarchies. The Centauri evolved as herd creatures. They excel at coordinated movement and group tactics. The Silicon Lords were solitary hunters. They are master strategists but poor team fighters." Zelthak's amusement was beginning to fade as Morrison continued. The recruit was displaying a level of knowledge about Federation species that impressed even the alien ambassador. Human intelligence. Services had clearly been more thorough in their observations than the Federation had realized. "But humans are different," Morrison continued. "We evolved as persistence hunters and tribal warriors. We developed not just physical capabilities, but psychological traits that are unknown among other species. We can form unbreakable bonds with soldiers from completely different backgrounds. We can fight beyond the point where rational analysis says we should surrender. We can adapt our tactics in real time during combat operations." Admiral Carter interrupted, her voice carrying a note of frustration. "Morrison, every species claims to have unique military advantages. The Federation has heard these arguments before from dozens of member races. It changes nothing about the political and economic realities we face." But Morrison was not finished. "Ma'am, with respect, the Federation has never seen humans fight. Not really fight. They have observed our peacekeeping operations and training exercises. They have studied our equipment and read our tactical manuals, but they have never witnessed what happens when human soldiers are truly tested in combat." He turned to address Zelthak directly, showing no intimidation despite the alien's imposing presence. "Ambassador, when was the last time Federation forces faced an opponent that refused to surrender even when defeat was certain? When did your military last encounter an enemy that became more dangerous as the situation became more hopeless?" Zelthak's eyes narrowed as he considered the question. "Your point being?" "My point is that the Federation bases its assessment of human military capability on incomplete information," Morrison replied. "You have seen our technology, which admittedly lags behind Federation standards. You have observed our organization, which follows conventional patterns similar to other species. But you have never seen the human factor in action. Kane found himself leaning forward, genuinely interested in where Morrison was taking this argument. The young man had clearly given this considerable thought, and his analysis of Federation species was more sophisticated than anything in the official intelligence briefings. The human factor? Zelthak asked, his voice carrying a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Morrison nodded. Sir, humans do not fight like other species. We do not calculate odds and surrender when defeat becomes mathematically certain. We do not break when our command structure is disrupted. We do not panic when our battle plan fails. Instead, we adapt, we improvise, and we continue fighting until we find a way to win, or until we are physically incapable of continuing. The room had become completely quiet except for Morrison's voice. Even Admiral Carter had stopped objecting, caught up in the recruit's unexpected eloquence. Martinez was taking notes, apparently recognizing that they were hearing something potentially significant. Throughout human history, Morrison continued, small forces have defeated much larger ones through determination, innovation, and sheer refusal to accept defeat. 300 Spartans held off an entire Persian army. A handful of British pilots saved their nation from invasion. American forces turned the tide of global conflicts through individual initiative and teamwork that their enemies could not match. Zelthak was no longer showing any trace of amusement. You speak of ancient history, recruit. Modern warfare is not decided by individual heroics. Morrison smiled for the first time since standing up. Sir, that is exactly what every human enemy has believed, right up until they lost. Jake Morrison stepped closer to the table, his confidence growing as he saw that he had captured the attention of everyone in the room. Even Ambassador Zelthak was listening intently now, his earlier dismissive attitude replaced by genuine curiosity about what the young human was proposing. Sir, if I may continue, Morrison said, addressing General Kane directly. The Federation's assessment of human military capability is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how we fight. They have analyzed our equipment, studied our organizational charts, and observed our training methods, but they have missed the most important factor. Kane nodded for him to continue. The document on the table remained unsigned, and for the first time since the meeting began, the general was not thinking about surrender. What factor is that, Morrison? The human spirit, sir. The thing that makes us refuse to quit even when quitting is the logical choice. Morrison turned to face Zelthak directly. Ambassador, your species evolved as apex predators. You understand dominance and submission. When a Vorthak warrior is clearly defeated, he submits to preserve his life. It is logical behavior that has served your species well. Zelthak's yellow eyes narrowed, but he did not interrupt. Morrison continued his analysis with the precision of someone who had studied these species extensively. The Centauri evolved as herd animals. When their formation is broken and their leaders are eliminated, they scatter to regroup at a safe distance. Again, this is logical survival behavior. Admiral Carter found herself drawn into Morrison's argument, despite her earlier objections. And humans? Humans, ma'am, are the species that looks at impossible odds and says, watch this. We are the ones who charge machine gun nests to save our teammates. We are the ones who hold positions until the last man rather than retreat when ordered to do so. We fight harder when we are losing, not because it is logical, but because it is who we are. Defense Secretary Martinez looked up from his notes. Morrison, courage is admirable, but modern warfare is about technology and resources. Individual heroics cannot overcome superior firepower and numbers. Morrison shook his head. Sir, with respect, that is exactly what the Federation believes. They think warfare is a mathematical equation where the side with better technology and more resources always wins. But human history proves otherwise again and again. He began pacing slightly as he spoke, his enthusiasm for the subject overcoming his military formality. At Thermopylae, 300 Spartans held off an army of hundreds of thousands for 3 days, not because they had better weapons, but because they refused to consider retreat. During World War II, a single company of American paratroopers held the town of Bastogne against an entire German division. When the enemy demanded surrender, The American commander replied with a single word. Nuts. Zelthak interrupted, his voice carrying a note of impatience. You speak of ancient battles fought with primitive weapons. Modern warfare has evolved beyond such crude tactics. Has it? Morrison asked, turning to face the alien ambassador directly. Sir, when was the last time Federation forces fought an enemy that adapted their tactics during the middle of a battle? When did your military last face opponents who treated casualties as motivation rather than discouragement? The question seemed to catch Zelthak off guard. He paused for several seconds before responding. Federation military doctrine is based on proven principles of strategic superiority and technological advantage. We do not rely on unpredictable emotional factors. Morrison smiled. And that, sir, is exactly why you do not understand how dangerous humans can be in combat. You prepare for logical enemies who behave according to predictable patterns, but humans specialize in being unpredictable. General Kane found himself genuinely intrigued by Morrison's argument. The young man was articulating something that Kane had felt but never been able to express clearly. Give me a specific example, Morrison. How would this human unpredictability manifest in modern combat? Morrison thought for a moment before answering. Sir, imagine a scenario where Federation forces have surrounded a human position. They have superior numbers, better weapons, and complete tactical advantage. Standard military doctrine says the humans should surrender to avoid unnecessary casualties, which would be the logical choice, Admiral Carter added. Yes, ma'am, it would be logical. But humans do not always choose logic over loyalty. Instead of surrendering, they would probably split into small teams and begin asymmetric attacks on the Federation forces. They would target command personnel, disrupt communications, and create chaos in the enemy ranks. Zelthak's expression showed growing interest despite himself. Such tactics might delay defeat, but they could not change the ultimate outcome. Morrison shook his head. Sir, you are still thinking like a Federation commander. You assume that military objectives remain constant throughout a battle, but humans excel at changing the rules of engagement during combat. If they cannot achieve their original objective, they will find a new objective that they can achieve. Such as? Kane asked. Rescue operations, sir. If a human unit cannot hold their position, they will focus on extracting wounded comrades. If they cannot win the battle, they will concentrate on gathering intelligence for future operations. If they cannot defeat the enemy, they will attempt to inflict maximum damage before being eliminated. Martinez looked puzzled. How does any of that constitute victory? Morrison's answer came immediately. Because, sir, humans do not measure victory the same way other species do. We count moral victories alongside tactical ones. A unit that fights to the last man while protecting civilian evacuees has achieved something meaningful, even if they are ultimately defeated. Their sacrifice inspires other units to fight harder and longer. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications of Morrison's argument. Zelthak studied the young human with new interest, clearly reassessing his earlier dismissive attitude. You suggest that human military effectiveness cannot be measured by conventional standards. Exactly, sir. Federation analysis assumes that all species calculate cost versus benefit the same way. But humans frequently choose courses of action that appear irrational to outside observers. We fight losing battles because they are the right thing to do. We sacrifice ourselves for principles that cannot be quantified. Kane leaned back in his chair, his mind racing through the implications of what he was hearing. Morrison, are you suggesting that the Federation has underestimated human military capability? Sir, I am suggesting that they have never seen it in action. They have observed our equipment and our organization, but they have never witnessed what happens when human soldiers are fighting for something they truly believe in. They have never seen us adapt and overcome when the situation appears hopeless. Zelthak's voice carried a note of challenge. And you believe this would make a difference in actual combat? Morrison met the alien's gaze without flinching. Sir, I believe it would make all the difference in the galaxy. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife as Morrison stared directly at Ambassador Zelthak. The young SEAL recruit had just challenged everything the Federation believed about military superiority, and now he was about to take an even bigger risk. "Ambassador," Morrison said, his voice steady and confident, "what if we offered to demonstrate what I am talking about? Not a theoretical discussion or a technical analysis, but an actual test of human military capabilities against Federation forces." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Admiral Carter started to object, but General Kane held up his hand for silence. Defense Secretary Martinez looked like he had swallowed something unpleasant, and even the junior officers in the back of the room were exchanging shocked glances. Zeltak's reptilian features showed genuine interest for the first time since the meeting had begun. "You propose some form of combat exercise?" Morrison nodded. "Yes, sir. A simulated battle scenario using full immersion training systems. Human special forces against the Federation's best warriors. Real tactics, real stress, real consequences, within the simulation parameters." "That is completely insane," Admiral Carter said, unable to contain herself any longer. "Morrison, you are talking about putting human forces against species that have been fighting interstellar wars for thousands of years. The Vorthak Empire alone has conquered 12 star systems through military conquest." But Morrison was not backing down. "Ma'am, that is exactly my point. The Federation has never fought humans because they have never needed to. Every species they have encountered has either surrendered when faced with superior technology or been defeated through conventional military superiority. They have never dealt with an enemy that refuses to follow the rules." Zelthak leaned forward, his yellow eyes fixed on Morrison with intense focus. "What would be the parameters of this demonstration?" Kane found himself intrigued despite the obvious risks. "Morrison, what exactly are you proposing?" The young recruit took a deep breath before answering. "Sir, I propose that we allow the Federation to choose the scenario. Any terrain, any objective, any rules they want to establish. Give them every possible advantage in terms of numbers, equipment, and positioning. Let them design a situation where human forces should have no chance of success." Martinez looked horrified. "And if we lose? If human forces are humiliated in front of the entire Federation? That would only confirm their belief that we need supervision." Morrison turned to address the Defense Secretary directly. "Sir, we are already about to surrender our military independence. The only question is whether we do it without a fight or after demonstrating what we are capable of. At least this way, we would go down swinging." Zelthak's amusement was returning, but it was mixed with genuine curiosity now. And what would humanity gain from such a demonstration? Even if your forces performed better than expected, it would not change the economic realities that brought us to this point. "Actually, it might," Morrison replied. "Ambassador, the Federation views humanity as a liability that needs to be controlled. But what if we could prove that we are actually an asset that could strengthen Federation military capabilities? What if human forces could contribute something valuable to galactic security?" Kane was beginning to see where Morrison was going with this. "You are talking about turning the negotiation around completely." "Yes, sir. Instead of begging to keep our independence, we demonstrate why the Federation should want us as equal partners. We show them that human military capabilities could enhance their own forces rather than threaten them." Admiral Carter shook her head. "Morrison, even if that were possible, the risks are enormous. If we fail, we lose everything. Earth becomes a cautionary tale about the consequences of challenging Federation authority." Morrison met her gaze steadily. "Ma'am, we are already losing everything." General Kane was about to sign that document when I interrupted. "The only difference is whether we lose with dignity or without it." Zeltak stood up slowly, his full height making him tower over everyone else in the room. "This is a most unusual proposal. You would stake your species' future on a military demonstration?" "We would stake it on the truth," Morrison replied. "The truth about what humans can accomplish when we are fighting for something that matters to us." Kane found himself actually considering the idea, despite its obvious dangers. "Morrison, what would you see as the stakes for such a demonstration?" Morrison's answer came without hesitation. "Sir, if human forces win, Earth maintains its military independence and gains full voting rights in the Federation Council. If we lose, we accept the surrender terms without any further negotiation." The room fell completely silent as everyone absorbed the magnitude of what Morrison was proposing. He was suggesting that humanity bet everything on a single military exercise, with no second chances and no room for negotiation afterward. Martinez was the first to break the silence. "This is madness. We would be risking the lives and future of 12 billion people on the performance of a few dozen soldiers." "Sir," Morrison replied, "those few dozen soldiers would be representing everything that makes humanity unique. They would be fighting not just for themselves, but for the right of our species to determine its own destiny." Zelthak was studying Morrison with obvious fascination. "You have remarkable confidence in your military abilities, young human. Tell me, what makes you believe that Federation forces would agree to such terms?" Morrison smiled. "Because, Ambassador, the Federation has been looking for a way to prove their superiority over humanity for 30 years. This would give them the perfect opportunity to do it in a controlled environment where they cannot lose. If they win, they get everything they wanted plus a public demonstration of their dominance. If they somehow lose, they still get credit for giving humanity a fair chance." Kane realized that Morrison was right about the Federation's motivations. They had been frustrated by humanity's stubborn independence for decades, and the chance to publicly demonstrate their superiority would be too tempting to resist. "What type of scenario would you suggest?" Kane asked, surprising himself by seriously considering the proposal. Morrison's response showed that he had thought this through carefully. "An assault scenario, sir. Federation forces defending a fortified position against human attackers. It plays to their strengths in terms of defensive technology and gives them the psychological advantage of being in prepared positions." "You would volunteer for such a mission?" Zelthak asked. Morrison nodded without hesitation. "Sir, I would consider it an honor to represent humanity in such a demonstration." General Kane looked around the room at the faces of his colleagues and subordinates. Most still showed doubt and concern, but he could see something else there too. For the first time since the meeting began, they were looking at something other than inevitable defeat. Morrison had given them hope, however slim, that there might be another way forward. Kane picked up his pen again, but this time he did not move it toward the signature line. Instead, he set it down carefully and looked directly at Ambassador Zelthak. "Ambassador, would the Federation Council consider such a demonstration?" Ambassador Zelthak studied General Kane for several long moments before responding. The alien's yellow eyes moved from Kane to Morrison and back again, clearly evaluating the unexpected turn the negotiations had taken. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a mixture of intrigue and calculation. "General Kane, I will need to consult with the Federation Council before responding to such an unusual proposal. However, I can tell you that there would likely be considerable interest in such a demonstration." Kane nodded, feeling a strange mixture of hope and terror at what they were contemplating. "How long would such a consultation take?" "I can have an answer within 6 hours," Zelthak replied. "The Council is currently in session on the capital world, and this matter would take priority over routine business." Admiral Carter looked around the room nervously. "General, perhaps we should discuss this proposal more thoroughly before committing to anything. The implications are enormous." But Morrison stepped forward again. "Sir, with respect, any delay gives the Federation time to analyze our capabilities and prepare countermeasures. If we are going to do this, it should be on short notice with minimal time for either side to overthink the scenarios." Zelthak's reptilian features shifted into what might have been approval. "The recruit makes an astute point. Extended preparation time would favor Federation forces significantly." Kane made his decision quickly, trusting his instincts the way he had learned to do during decades of military service. "Ambassador, please contact the Federation Council. Tell them that Earth is prepared to demonstrate human military capabilities, under whatever terms they consider appropriate." "Sir," Martinez protested, "surely we need approval from higher authorities before making such a commitment." Kane shook his head. "The President gave me full authority to handle these negotiations as I see fit. If I believe this offers our best chance to preserve human independence, then that is the path we will take. Selthak activated a communication device that had been lying dormant on the table throughout the meeting. The device projected a holographic display showing alien text that scrolled rapidly as he input his message to the Federation Council. When he finished, he looked up at the assembled humans. The message has been sent. You should have your answer soon. The next 4 hours passed like an eternity. Morrison was dismissed to prepare a preliminary list of potential volunteers while the senior officials debated the wisdom of what they had just committed to do. Admiral Carter argued strenuously against the plan, pointing out that failure would be catastrophic for humanity's standing in the galaxy. Martinez worried about the political consequences if word of the challenge leaked to the press before it was resolved. But Kane found himself increasingly convinced that Morrison had identified their only real option. The Federation had been systematically weakening Earth's position for years, using economic pressure and diplomatic isolation to force compliance with their demands. Traditional negotiation had failed because humanity had nothing left to offer, except surrender. The response from the Federation Council arrived ahead of schedule. Selthak activated his communication device and read the incoming message with obvious satisfaction. When he finished, he looked up at Kane with something that might have been respect. The Council has accepted your proposal with enthusiasm. They have also chosen the specific scenario for the demonstration. Kane felt his stomach tighten. What are the parameters? A fortified defensive position will be constructed on Kepler Station using the most advanced Federation military technology. The position will be defended by an elite Fourth-Act combat unit consisting of 60 warriors under the command of Commander Kralix, one of their most experienced officers. Admiral Carter leaned forward. And the human force? 30 personnel maximum, armed with standard Federation equipment to ensure fairness. The objective will be to capture and hold the central command bunker for a period of 4 hours. The simulation will use full immersion technology that replicates the stress and physical demands of actual combat without permanent injury. Martinez did quick calculations in his head. 2-to-1 odds, defending prepared positions with superior technology. Those are terrible odds for an attacking force. Selthak nodded approvingly. The Council wanted to ensure that the demonstration would be definitive. If human forces succeed under such disadvantageous conditions, it will prove their exceptional capabilities. If they fail, it will confirm the wisdom of placing them under Federation supervision. Kane studied the terms carefully. They were brutal, exactly as Morrison had predicted they would be. The Federation was designing a scenario where human defeat would be inevitable according to conventional military analysis. When would this demonstration take place? 2 weeks from today. That will allow time to construct the defensive position and transport the necessary personnel to Kepler Station. Morrison, who had returned during the discussion, stepped forward. Sir, that timeline is actually advantageous for us. It gives us enough time to select and prepare a team without allowing for extensive tactical analysis by Federation forces. Selthak looked at Morrison with obvious curiosity. You remain confident despite these terms? Morrison met the alien's gaze steadily. Sir, these are exactly the kind of odds that bring out the best in human soldiers. We perform better when success seems impossible. Over the following days, word of the challenge spread rapidly through military channels. Kane had expected difficulty finding volunteers for such a dangerous mission, but instead he was overwhelmed with applications. Every branch of human special forces wanted to participate. Rangers, SEALs, Delta Force, Marine Force Recon, and elite units from allied nations all submitted personnel requests. The selection process became more competitive than any recruitment program in military history. Kane appointed Morrison as the tactical coordinator for the mission, not because of his rank, but because of his insight into what made human forces unique. Veterans with decades of experience found themselves taking orders from a young recruit who had demonstrated an understanding of asymmetric warfare that exceeded their own. The final team consisted of 30 individuals representing the absolute best of human military capability. Each volunteer understood that they were fighting not just for themselves but for the future of their entire species. The weight of that responsibility could have been crushing, but instead it seemed to energize them. Morrison spent countless hours with each team member, analyzing their strengths and developing tactics that would maximize their effectiveness against Vorthak opponents. The aliens were physically stronger and more resilient than humans, with natural armor that could deflect small arms fire. But they were also cold-blooded creatures with slower reflexes in certain temperature ranges. As the departure date approached, Kane found himself alternating between confidence and terror. Morrison's tactical innovations were brilliant, but they were still untested against actual Federation forces. The young man had identified weaknesses in Vorthak physiology and psychology that might be exploitable. But there was no guarantee that War Commander Kralex would fall for such tactics. The night before departure, Kane met privately with Morrison in his Pentagon office. "Son, are you sure about this? Once we arrive at Kepler Station, there will be no backing out." Morrison nodded without hesitation. "Sir, this is what humans do best. We face impossible odds and find a way to win anyway. Tomorrow we are going to show the galaxy what that looks like." Kane studied the young man's face, seeing the kind of quiet confidence that had made human forces legendary throughout their history. "What happens if we lose?" Morrison's answer came immediately. "Sir, if we lose fighting as hard as we can, then we were never going to win anyway. But if we win, we change everything for humanity." The next morning, the team departed for Kepler Station aboard a Federation transport vessel. As Earth fell away behind them, Kane realized that they were carrying the hopes and dreams of 12 billion people into battle against impossible odds. It was exactly where humans belonged. Kepler Station hung in space like a massive metal flower, its rotating sections creating artificial gravity for the thousands of beings who lived and worked within its hull. The station had been chosen as the site for the demonstration because of its advanced simulation facilities, which could create completely realistic combat scenarios without permanent injury to the participants. Jake Morrison stood at the observation deck window, watching Federation ships arrive from across the galaxy. Representatives from dozens of species had come to witness what most expected to be a quick demonstration of human inadequacy. The betting pools, he had heard, heavily favored the Vorthak defenders. War Commander Kralex had arrived 3 days earlier with his elite unit. Morrison had managed to observe them briefly during their preparation phase, and what he saw both impressed and worried him. The Vorthak warriors were massive creatures, each standing over 7 feet tall with natural armor plating that covered their reptilian hides. They moved with the fluid grace of born predators and carried weapons that could punch through standard military armor like tissue paper. But Morrison had also noticed something that might prove useful. The Vorthak prepared for battle with methodical precision, following established procedures and protocols that had served them well for thousands of years. They were professional soldiers in the truest sense, but that professionalism might also be a weakness if properly exploited. The human team had spent the previous week in intensive preparation. Morrison had divided them into 6 5-person squads, each with specialized roles and responsibilities. Alpha Squad consisted of assault specialists led by Sergeant Pete Collins, a veteran ranger with extensive urban warfare experience. Bravo Squad was heavy weapons specialists under Staff Sergeant Maria Lopez, a Marine who had served in 3 different planetary conflicts. Charlie Squad focused on reconnaissance and infiltration, led by Petty Officer First Class Tony Kim, a SEAL with more covert operations experience than anyone else on the team. Delta Squad handled communications and electronic warfare under the command of Technical Sergeant Linda Grant, an Air Force specialist who could hack alien computer systems as easily as human ones. Echo Squad was the medical and support team, led by Hospital Corpsman Chief Amy Rogers, who had kept human soldiers alive in conditions that would have challenged Federation medical technology. Finally, Foxtrot Squad served as the command element, with Morrison himself leading alongside General Kane, who had insisted on participating despite his senior rank. The defensive position that the Federation had constructed was a masterpiece of military engineering. The central command bunker sat at the heart of a complex that covered nearly 10 square kilometers of simulated terrain. Multiple defensive rings protected the objective, each equipped with automated weapon systems, energy barriers, and sophisticated sensor networks that could detect approaching enemies from kilometers away. War Commander Kralex had positioned his forces with tactical skill that Morrison could only admire. Heavy weapons teams covered all the obvious approach routes, while mobile response squads were positioned to reinforce any threatened sector. The Vorthak commander had even prepared for unconventional attacks, positioning snipers in elevated positions and establishing kill zones that would channel attackers into predetermined areas. On the morning of the demonstration, Morrison gathered his team for final preparations. The simulation would begin at 800 hours station time, and they would have exactly 12 hours to capture and hold the command bunker for the required 4-hour period. Failure meant the end of human military independence forever. Remember, Morrison told his assembled soldiers, we are not trying to fight like the Vorthak expect us to fight. We are going to do things they have never seen before, using tactics they cannot predict or counter. Our advantage is not in our equipment or our numbers. Our advantage is that we think differently than any enemy they have ever faced. Sergeant Collins raised his hand. What about the automation systems? Those weapon platforms do not care about psychological warfare. Morrison smiled. Actually, Sergeant, that is exactly what we are counting on. Automated systems follow programmed responses. They react to specific stimuli in predictable ways. We are going to use that predictability against them. The simulation began with a massive diversionary assault on the eastern perimeter. Alpha and Bravo squads attacked the defensive positions with conventional tactics, drawing the attention of the Vorthak defenders and their automated systems. The assault was fierce enough to convince War Commander Kralex that this was the main attack, causing him to shift additional forces to reinforce that sector. Meanwhile, Charlie's squad had begun their infiltration mission on the opposite side of the complex. Using thermal camouflage and electronic countermeasures developed by Delta Squad, they bypassed the outer sensor networks completely. The key was Morrison's insight into Vorthak physiology. Their infrared vision was optimized for detecting warm-blooded prey, but it had difficulty distinguishing between humans and background heat sources when the temperature differential was. Minimized Echo Squad provided crucial support by establishing a mobile medical station that allowed wounded soldiers to return to combat within minutes instead of hours. But their most important contribution was psychological. Knowing that wounded comrades would receive immediate care made the human soldiers fight with even greater determination. The breakthrough came when Morrison's command squad executed a maneuver that no Federation military analyst had predicted. Instead of trying to punch through the defensive perimeter, they used the diversionary assault as cover to establish forward positions within the complex itself. Small teams infiltrated between defensive positions and began attacking from unexpected directions. War Commander Kralex found himself facing a type of warfare that his species had never encountered. Human soldiers appeared in places where no attacker should have been able to penetrate, then disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. The automated defense systems programmed to engage targets moving toward the command bunker were confused by enemies who seemed to be moving randomly in all directions. The Vorthak response was tactically sound, but ultimately predictable. They consolidated their forces around the command bunker and established overlapping fields of fire that should have made human approach impossible. But Morrison had anticipated this reaction and prepared accordingly. Delta Squad's electronic warfare capabilities proved decisive in the final assault. Using alien computer viruses developed specifically for the demonstration, they temporarily disabled the automated weapon systems while creating false sensor readings that convinced the defenders they were under attack from multiple directions, simultaneously. The climactic battle took place in the command bunker itself, where Vorthak warriors fought with the desperation of professional soldiers who suddenly found themselves outmaneuvered by supposedly inferior opponents. But the confined space worked against their natural advantages, while human adaptability and teamwork allowed for rapid tactical adjustments. War Commander Kralex himself was ultimately captured by Petty Officer Kim's infiltration team, who had entered the bunker through a maintenance tunnel that the Vorthak had dismissed as too small for effective use. The tunnel was indeed too small for Vorthak warriors, but it was perfectly adequate for humans willing to crawl through tight spaces to reach their objective. The simulation ended with human forces in complete control of the command bunker and most of the defensive complex. They had not only achieved their objective but had done so with minimal casualties and in half the allotted time. The Federation observers sat in stunned silence as they realized they had witnessed something unprecedented in galactic military history. Morrison stood in the captured command center, looking at the tactical displays that showed the complete collapse of what should have been an impregnable defensive position. Around him, his soldiers celebrated their victory with the quiet satisfaction of professionals who had done their job well. General Kane approached Morrison with obvious pride. "Son, I think you just changed the course of human history." Morrison nodded, but his expression remained serious. "Sir, the hard part is just beginning. Now we have to prove that this was not a fluke, and that human forces can be trusted as equal partners in galactic defense." Outside the simulation chamber, Ambassador Zelthak was having an intense discussion with War Commander Kralex and other Federation officials. For the first time in his diplomatic career, the alien ambassador was genuinely uncertain about what would happen next. Humanity had proven its point in the most dramatic way possible. The question now was, what the galaxy would do with that knowledge. The silence in Kepler Station's main observation deck was deafening. Representatives from dozens of Federation species stared at the tactical displays showing the complete human victory over forces that should have been superior in every measurable way. War Commander Kralex stood with his arms crossed, his reptilian features showing a mixture of respect and bewilderment as he watched the replay of his own defeat. Ambassador Zelthak was the first to break the silence. "I must contact the Federation Council immediately. This changes everything we believed about human military capabilities." General Kane stood beside Jake Morrison, both men still wearing their simulation gear. The victory felt surreal after 30 years of human subjugation within the Federation hierarchy. "Ambassador, I trust this demonstration has provided the information your council was seeking." Zelthak nodded slowly. "General Kane, I confess that I expected this exercise to confirm our assessment of human limitations. Instead, it has revealed capabilities that we did not know existed among any Federation species." Morrison stepped forward, his voice respectful, but confident. "Sir, this is what we have been trying to explain. Human military effectiveness cannot be measured by conventional standards because we do not fight according to conventional methods." War Commander Kralex approached the human team, his massive frame towering over even the tallest soldiers. When he spoke, his voice carried genuine respect. "Young warrior, your tactics were unlike anything in my experience. How did you predict our responses so accurately?" Morrison met the alien commander's gaze without intimidation. "Sir, we studied your species' military history and psychological profiles. You fight with honor and precision, following established doctrine that has served you well for centuries. But that predictability became a weakness when faced with opponents who deliberately broke the rules." "Broke the rules?" Zelthak asked. "Not dishonorably, sir," Morrison clarified quickly, "but we used tactics that your forces had never encountered before. Infiltration routes that seemed too difficult to be practical. Diversionary attacks that served multiple purposes simultaneously. Electronic warfare integrated with psychological operations in ways that confused both your automated systems and your command structure." Sergeant Collins added his perspective. "Commander, your warriors fought with incredible skill and courage, but they were fighting the battle they expected to fight, not the battle we chose to give them." Kralex considered this for several moments, before responding. "You speak of choosing the nature of combat itself. This suggests a level of tactical flexibility that our military academies do not teach." Admiral Carter, who had observed the entire battle from the command center, looked troubled. "Morrison, the implications of this victory extend far beyond our immediate situation. If word spreads that human forces can defeat Federation units under favorable conditions, It will change the balance of power throughout the galaxy, Zelthak finished. Other species may begin to question Federation authority if they believe they have military alternatives. Kane recognized the concern, but also saw the opportunity. Ambassador, perhaps that is exactly what the Federation needs. A partner species that can provide military capabilities that complement rather than threaten existing structures. Morrison nodded eagerly. Sir, humans have no desire to conquer or dominate other species, but we could serve as specialists in situations where conventional military approaches are insufficient. Counter-insurgency operations, rescue missions, defensive scenarios where adaptability matters more than raw firepower. The discussion was interrupted by an urgent communication from the Federation Council. Zelthak activated his device and listened intently to the incoming message. When he finished, his expression showed a mixture of surprise and calculation. The Council has reached a preliminary decision, he announced. Instead of the surrender terms originally proposed, they are offering Earth a full military alliance, with voting rights on the Federation Defense Committee. The human delegation exchanged glances of amazement. Morrison had hoped for the preservation of human independence, but this was far more than he had dared to imagine. What would be the terms of such an alliance? Zelthak consulted his communication device again. Earth would maintain its existing military forces while also contributing specialized units to Federation operations. Human tactical doctrine would be studied and integrated into Federation training programs. In exchange, Earth would receive full access to Federation military technology and intelligence resources. Kane felt like he was dreaming. And our sovereignty? Completely preserved. Earth would be considered an equal partner in galactic defense rather than a junior member requiring supervision. Morrison stepped forward again. Sir, there is one more thing. The demonstration today involved only a small sample of human military capability. If the Federation is serious about this alliance, they should understand what they are getting as partners. War Commander Kralix looked intrigued. Explain. Sir, every soldier on this team volunteered for a mission that could have ended their military careers and doomed their species to permanent subjugation. They fought not for personal glory or material gain, but for the principle that humanity deserves the right to determine its own destiny. Morrison gestured toward his teammates. Multiply that motivation by the millions of human soldiers serving around the galaxy, and you begin to understand what the Federation would gain as allies. Warriors who will fight harder for their friends than for themselves. Soldiers who become more dangerous as situations become more desperate. Units that achieve victory through determination when technology and numbers are insufficient. Kralix nodded slowly. I begin to understand why your small force was able to defeat my larger one. You were not just fighting for tactical objectives. You were fighting for the survival of your species' independence. Exactly, sir. And now we would be fighting for the security of the entire Federation. Over the following days, the details of the alliance were negotiated and finalized. Earth would contribute specialized forces to Federation military operations while maintaining complete control over its own defense. Human tactical innovations would be shared with other species, while Federation technology would accelerate human military development by centuries. Morrison found himself appointed as the first human liaison to the Federation Special Operations Command. His insights into human military psychology would help establish new training programs that incorporated human tactical thinking into existing Federation doctrine. The transformation was remarkable. Within months, mixed human-alien units were operating throughout Federation space. Human adaptability combined with alien technology proved devastatingly effective against pirates, smugglers, and the occasional rogue system that challenged Federation authority. But perhaps more importantly, the alliance changed how other species viewed humanity. No longer seen as violent primitives requiring supervision, humans were recognized as valuable partners whose unique capabilities enhanced galactic security. General Kane stood before the United Nations General Assembly 6 months after the demonstration, at Kepler Station. The same room where he had once feared announcing humanity's surrender now witnessed his report on Earth's new status as a leading voice in galactic defense. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kane began, "I am proud to report that humanity has not only preserved its independence, but has become an essential partner in maintaining peace throughout the galaxy. Our soldiers serve alongside alien allies in missions that protect billions of innocent beings from those who would do them harm." He paused to look at the assembled delegates. "We achieved this not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but by demonstrating the values that have always defined human military service: loyalty, courage, and the refusal to surrender when fighting for what is right." In the audience, Morrison listened with pride as Kane described the transformation that had begun with a young recruit's refusal to accept defeat. The path from that moment in the Pentagon briefing room to this triumphant speech had been long and dangerous, but it had led to something remarkable. As Kane concluded his address, Morrison reflected on what they had accomplished. Humanity had earned its place among the stars not by conquering its neighbors, but by proving that even the greatest challenges could be overcome through determination, innovation, and unbreakable bonds between warriors who refused to give up on each other. The stars belonged to humanity now, not as conquerors but as guardians. And that, Morrison thought, was exactly as it should be.